My name is Olivia Parker, and at 24, I thought I had my financial life figured out. Every first Saturday of the month, I'd spread my paperwork across my tiny kitchen table in my Phoenix apartment, organizing student loan statements with the same methodical precision I used for everything else. Coffee growing cold beside me, I'd check each payment, each balance, making sure my carefully calculated budget could handle another month of graduate school and part-time work at the Sunrise Community Center. That October morning started like any other. The desert sun streamed through my kitchen window, highlighting dust motes that danced above my neat stacks of documents. I was humming an old song my grandmother used to sing while I opened the monthly statement from federal student aid. The routine was comforting, a small ritual of responsibility that made me feel like I was succeeding despite everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then I saw the number. My federal loan balance had jumped by $75,000. I blinked, certain I was reading it wrong. My hands trembled as I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic making a sharp click against the table. The statement showed multiple new loans, all processed within the last 3 months. Loans I had never applied for. Loans connected to something called Southwest Digital University. I had never heard of Southwest Digital University in my life. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed my laptop, fingers stumbling across the keyboard as I logged into my federal aid account. There it was, black and white on the screen, enrollment verification for a graduate program in business administration at an online university I'd never applied to, never even researched. The loans had been dispersed to an account with routing numbers I didn't recognize. Someone had stolen my identity. Someone had been using my social security number, my personal information, to fund fake education at a fake school. The careful financial foundation I'd built over years of working 3 jobs to supplement my real education was crumbling beneath me. I called the loan servicer immediately, my voice shaking as I explained to the representative that I hadn't enrolled in any online university. The woman on the other end was sympathetic, but firm. The documentation looked legitimate, the enrollment was verified, and reversing fraudulent loans would require a formal investigation that could take months. Months I didn't have. Months that would leave me responsible for payments on education I never received. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon sun shifted, casting different shadows across my papers. Who had access to my information? Who knew enough about my financial situation to pull this off so cleanly? The answer came to me with sickening clarity. 3 months ago, during my cousin Brittany's birthday party at my dad's house, she'd helped me organize my financial documents when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by all the paperwork for my graduate program. We'd spent an evening sorting through loan applications, tax forms, and personal information. She'd been so helpful, so interested in understanding the process. Brittany was 4 years older than me, and we'd grown up together like sisters. When I became the first person in our family to graduate college, she'd been one of my loudest cheerleaders. When I got into graduate school for social work, she'd hug me so tight I could barely breathe, telling everyone how proud she was of her brilliant little cousin. With shaking fingers, I dialed her number. Livy! Her voice was bright, cheerful, using the childhood nickname that usually made me smile. What's up, cousin? Brittany, I need to ask you something. I struggled to keep my voice steady. Do you remember when you helped me organize my financial papers a few months ago? Of course, that was such a mess. I don't know how you keep track of everything. Why? I took a deep breath. Someone has been using my student loan information to enroll in a fake university. They've taken out $75,000 in my name. The silence on the other end stretched too long. When Brittany finally spoke, her voice had changed. Higher, more concerned. Oh my God, Olivia, that's terrible. Identity theft is so scary. Do you have any idea who might have done it? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I watched a neighbor's cat pick its way across my apartment complex's courtyard, envying its simple, uncomplicated life. The university is called Southwest Digital University, I said, watching for her reaction even though she couldn't see me. No, never. But, Olivia, you should definitely report this to the police or whoever handles this kind of thing. Identity theft is serious. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon sun shifted, casting different shadows across my papers. Brittany's responses had been exactly what an innocent person would say, but they'd also been exactly what a guilty person would say if they were trying very hard to sound innocent.
That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brittany's hands on my documents, her careful questions about loan applications and disbursement processes. How she'd asked so many questions about deadlines and verification procedures. Questions I'd thought showed family interest in my education. Questions that now seemed like reconnaissance. By 3 in the morning, I'd made a decision. Tomorrow, I would start digging deeper into the Southwest Digital University. I would find out exactly how my information had been used and by whom. If Brittany was innocent, the investigation would prove it. If she wasn't, I stared at the ceiling of my small apartment, listening to the distant sounds of late-night Phoenix traffic, and realized that, either way, my relationship with my family was about to change forever. Sunday dinner at my father's house had been a weekly tradition for as long as I could remember. The small ranch-style home in central Phoenix would fill with the sounds of my extended family. Dad's booming laugh, Aunt Linda's gentle voice, and Brittany's animated storytelling. It was supposed to be our safe space, where the pressures of work and school melted away in favor of my father's famous carne asada and my stepmother Rosa's homemade tortillas. But this Sunday, I walked through the front door carrying a manila folder that felt like it weighed 50 pounds. I'd spent the week investigating, and what I'd found made my blood run cold. The routing number associated with my fraudulent loans traced back to an account registered under variations of Brittany's name. The IP address used to submit the loan applications matched her home internet connection. Most damning of all, Southwest Digital University's business registration listed her apartment as its administrative office. "Olivia!" Dad's voice boomed from the kitchen, where he was tending to meat sizzling on his indoor grill. "Perfect timing, mija. The food's almost ready." The familiar smell of charred beef and onions usually made my mouth water, but today my stomach was twisted in knots. I hugged him mechanically, scanning the living room for Brittany. She was on the couch, laughing at something Rosa was showing her on her phone, looking completely relaxed and innocent. "Hey, Livy," she called out, waving me over. "Come see this video of Rosa's new grandson. He's already trying to walk." I forced a smile, but didn't move toward the couch. "Actually, Brittany, I was hoping we could talk privately for a minute. In the kitchen?" Something flickered across her face, so quick I might have imagined it. "Sure, of course." We walked into the kitchen together, passing Dad, who was humming while he flipped meat. I waited until we were in the small pantry area away from the others before opening my folder. I did some research this week about Southwest Digital University. Funny thing, it's registered to your address. Brittany's eyes widened. "What? That's impossible. Let me see that." She reached for the papers, but I held them back. "These bank routing numbers trace back to accounts you control. The loan applications were submitted from your IP address. And look at this." I showed her a screenshot of the university's faculty page. "This professor's photo? That's a stock image from a website selling fake diplomas." For a moment, Brittany's face went completely blank. Then slowly, her expression crumbled into something that looked like relief mixed with desperation. Okay, yes, I used your information. But Olivia, you have to understand, I was trying to help you." "Help me? Brittany, you stole $75,000. "I was going to tell you. The plan was to use the loan money to actually get you additional funding for your program, like a private scholarship. You're always so stressed about money, always working those awful part-time jobs. I thought I could take care of it." I stared at her, struggling to process the logic. "You created a fake university to steal student loan money to help me? It wasn't supposed to be fake." Her voice was rising, and I shushed her, glancing toward the living room. "I was going to make it real. I was researching accreditation, looking into actual course materials, but then everything got complicated and the loan money was already committed, and I didn't know how to fix it without getting in trouble." "So you decided to let me get in trouble instead." Tears started streaming down Brittany's face. "I never meant it to go this far. I've watched you struggle so hard for everything, and I wanted to be the one who made it easier for once. I wanted to be helpful instead of just the cousin who never made it through college." The conversation was interrupted by Dad's voice calling from the kitchen. "Girls, what's taking so long? The food's getting cold." Brittany quickly wiped her eyes. "Please don't say anything yet. Let me figure out how to make this right." But as we walked back into the main area, Aunt Linda was looking at us with concern. "Everything okay? You both look upset." I found myself at a crossroads. I could play along, keep the family peace, let Brittany figure out how to make this right, or I could tell the truth and shatter the careful harmony of our Sunday dinner tradition forever. "Actually," I said, setting my folder down on the coffee table, "we need to have a family discussion about something serious." Dad turned off the grill and came over, Rosa following behind him. Aunt Linda set down her phone. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. "Brittany has been using my student loan information to commit fraud," I said simply. "She's created a fake university and stolen $75,000 in my name." The silence that followed was deafening. Then everyone started talking at once. "That's impossible," Aunt Linda said, her voice sharp. "Brittany would never—" "Olivia, that's a serious accusation," Dad interrupted, his face stern. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "She just admitted it to me," I said, looking at Brittany, who had gone pale. "In the kitchen. She said she was trying to help me, but she created a fake university and used my identity to get federal student loans." Brittany burst into tears. "I was trying to help her. She's always struggling with money, always stressed about school. I thought I could find a way to get her more funding without her having to work so much." "By committing federal fraud?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Dad held up his hands. "Okay, everyone, just calm down. Let's think about this rationally. This is a family problem, and we can solve it as a family." "Dad, this isn't just a family problem. This is a federal crime. I'm responsible for loans I never took out, for education I never received. My credit is destroyed. My future is—" "Your future is fine," Dad said firmly. "We'll figure out how to pay back the money. Brittany will get a job. We'll set up a payment plan. But we don't need to involve outsiders in our business." I stared at him in disbelief. "Outsiders? Dad, she committed identity theft. She created a fake university. There are probably other victims." "Are there other victims?" Aunt Linda asked Brittany quietly. Her sob caught in her throat. "A few. But I was going to pay everyone back once I figured out how to make the university legitimate." The room erupted again. Rosa was speaking rapidly in Spanish, her hands gesturing wildly. Dad was pacing, running his hands through his hair. Aunt Linda was interrogating Brittany about the scope of the fraud. But it was what Brittany said next that changed everything. "There are about 40 other people enrolled in the program," she whispered. "Single mothers mostly, working people trying to get degrees. I targeted people who wouldn't ask too many questions about an online program." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. 40 families. 40 people whose educational dreams were being exploited by my cousin. "Olivia," Dad said, his voice gentle but firm, "I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But involving the police, the federal government, that's going to destroy Brittany's life. She made a mistake, but she's family. We protect family." I looked around the room at the faces of people I loved, people who had supported me through college, celebrated my successes, encouraged my dreams. They were asking me to be complicit in protecting someone who had not just betrayed me personally, but was actively harming dozens of other families. "I can't do that," I said quietly. "I won't do that." Aunt Linda was staring at her daughter with a mixture of heartbreak and horror. "Brittany, how could you do this? These people trusted you with their dreams." "I was going to make it work," she insisted. "I just needed more time." "Time to steal from more families?" I asked. Dad stepped between us. "Olivia, you need to think carefully about what you're saying. Once you involve the authorities, there's no going back. Brittany could go to prison. Is that really what you want?" I looked at my cousin, who had helped me organize my homework when we were kids, who had celebrated every academic achievement with genuine joy, and who had made me believe that family always had your back. "What I want," I said, "is for 40 families to get their money back and their dreams restored. What I want is for no one else to fall victim to the scheme. And if that means Brittany faces consequences for her choices, then yes, that's what needs to happen."
I picked up my folder from the coffee table. The carne asada sat cooling on the grill, filling the air with the scent of what should have been a perfect family dinner. I'm going to the authorities tomorrow, I announced. Anyone who wants to help make this right is welcome to join me. Anyone who wants to pretend this isn't happening can go ahead and try. As I walked toward the door, I heard Aunt Linda's voice, quiet but clear. Brittany, I need you to tell me everything, right now. No more lies. The last thing I heard before closing the door was my cousin's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Mama, I think I'm in really big trouble. Monday morning found me sitting in Dr. Patricia Mills's office at Arizona State University, my manila folder of evidence spread across her desk like pieces of a crime scene. The familiar space, lined with social work textbooks and decorated with pictures of her former students, had always been a sanctuary for me. Today it felt like a lifeline. Dr. Mills studied the documents with the same intense focus she brought to reviewing my thesis proposals. Her silver hair caught the morning light streaming through her window as she flipped through bank statements, screenshots, and registration records. I'd been her graduate advisee for 2 years, but I'd never seen her look quite so serious. Olivia, she said, removing her reading glasses and looking at me with concern, this isn't just family drama. This is federal fraud on a massive scale. I know. My voice came out smaller than I intended. My family wants me to handle it privately, but there are 40 other victims. 40 families who think they're getting legitimate educations. Dr. Mills leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her. Tell me about the confrontation with your family. I recounted Sunday's dinner, a way my father had prioritized family loyalty over justice, how Aunt Linda had looked when she realized the scope of her daughter's crimes. My dad thinks I'm betraying the family by even considering involving authorities. And what do you think? The question hung in the air between us. It was such a Dr. Mills question. She never told students what to do, but guided them toward finding their own answers through careful inquiry. I think, I said slowly, that if I don't report this, more families will be hurt. I think that staying silent makes me complicit in ongoing fraud. And I think that protecting someone who's actively harming vulnerable people isn't really protecting them at all. Dr. Mills nodded. You're absolutely right. And Olivia, there's something else you need to understand. The people your cousin is targeting, single mothers, working parents, first-generation college students, these are exactly the populations we're training you to serve and protect. This isn't just personal anymore. This is about your professional ethics as a future social worker. She was right, and the realization hit me like a weight in my chest. I'd spent 2 years studying how systems of oppression harm vulnerable communities, how those with power exploit those without it. Brittany wasn't just stealing money, she was stealing hope from people who had the least to spare. I need to report this, but I don't know where to start. Dr. Mills was already reaching for her phone. I do. 20 minutes later, I was connected with the Department of Education's fraud hotline. The representative, a woman named Sarah, listened patiently as I explained the situation. She asked detailed questions about the timeline, the university's claims, and the scope of victims I knew about. Ms. Parker, Sarah said when I finished, Southwest Digital University is already under preliminary investigation. You're the third person to report suspicious activity related to this institution. I'm going to connect you with Detective Amanda Torres. She's with our Office of Inspector General and specializes in educational fraud cases. My hands were shaking when I hung up. 3 victims had already reached out. The web was larger than even Brittany had admitted. Dr. Mills walked me to the coffee shop in the student union while we waited for Detective Torres to call back. The familiar bustle of campus life, students rushing between classes, groups studying together, the energy of learning and growth felt surreal against the backdrop of the fraud investigation. Are you prepared for how this might affect your relationship with your family? Dr. Mills asked gently. I stared into my coffee cup, watching the cream swirl into patterns. My dad hasn't spoken to me since yesterday. He thinks I'm being selfish and vindictive. My Aunt Linda texted this morning asking if we could meet before I do anything official. And Brittany?
Radio silence. The words came out bitter. After 2 years of constant contact, family events, shared holidays, nothing. My phone rang. Detective Amanda Torres's voice was warm but professional, with a slight accent that reminded me of my grandmother. She explained that she'd been tracking Southwest Digital University for several weeks, following reports from victims in Phoenix, Tucson, and Las Cruces. Miss Parker, would you be available to meet this afternoon? I'd like to go through your evidence and discuss your cousin's role in the operation. We arranged to meet at the Federal Building downtown. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, realizing that I'd just crossed a line my family would never forgive. Dr. Mills reached across the small table and squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing, Olivia. It's not easy, but it's right. What if I'm wrong? What if there's some explanation I'm missing? What if I destroy my family for nothing? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, she said simply. But right now, you have evidence of ongoing fraud targeting vulnerable populations. Your ethical obligation is clear. The Federal Building was an imposing concrete structure downtown, all sharp angles and tinted windows that reflected the desert sky. Going through security felt surreal. I kept expecting someone to stop me, to ask what a social worker graduate student like me was doing in a place like this. Detective Torres met me in the lobby. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and an air of competent professionalism that immediately put me at ease. She led me to a small conference room where she'd already laid out files and documents. Before we begin, she said, I want you to know that you're not the first person to struggle with reporting a family member. Educational fraud cases often involve people the victims trust, family members, community leaders, people who have access to personal information and vulnerable populations. I opened my folder and began walking her through the evidence I'd gathered. She asked detailed questions, took careful notes, and occasionally pulled out her own documents to cross-reference information. Miss Parker, your cousin isn't just running a simple diploma mill. This is a sophisticated operation designed to maximize student loan disbursements while minimizing oversight. The targeting of single mothers and working parents isn't accidental. These are exactly the populations we're training you to serve and protect. This isn't just personal anymore. This is about your professional ethics as a future social worker.
She showed me a map on her laptop with red pins marking victim locations across 3 states. We've identified 47 victims so far, with total fraud exceeding $2 million. $2 million? The number made my head spin. What happens now? I asked. Now we build a case. I'll need you to provide a formal statement, help us understand the family connections, and how your cousin gained access to personal information. We'll be interviewing other victims, gathering digital evidence, and ultimately, we'll present everything to federal prosecutors. Will Brittany be arrested? Detective Torres studied my face carefully. If the evidence supports it, yes. Educational fraud at this level carries serious federal penalties. I want you to be prepared for that possibility. Walking out of the Federal Building into the late afternoon Phoenix heat, I felt like I was emerging from an alternate reality. The investigation was real now, official, irreversible. There would be interviews, statements, possibly testimony. Brittany would likely be arrested. My family would never forgive me. But 47 families would get justice. 47 families whose dreams had been exploited would see their exploiter held accountable. I sat in my car for a long time, air conditioning blasting, staring at the Federal Building's imposing facade. My phone showed 17 missed calls from various family members, but I wasn't ready to deal with that yet. Instead, I drove home to my small apartment where I made a simple dinner and spent the evening thinking about the difference between loyalty and justice, between protecting family and protecting community. By the time I went to bed, I knew I'd made the right choice. The investigation was just beginning, but for the first time since discovering those fraudulent loans, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone.
Working with Detective Torres over the following weeks felt like being inducted into a secret world of digital forensics and federal investigations. I found myself spending afternoons in sterile government offices, learning terms like IP geolocation and financial transaction analysis, while watching David Mitchell, the IT forensic specialist, trace the digital breadcrumbs of Brittany's operation. David was younger than I'd expected, maybe 26, with the kind of intense focus that came from spending hours staring at computer screens hunting cybercriminals. When Detective Torres introduced us, he looked up from his bank of monitors with eyes that seemed to see patterns everywhere. "Your cousin is smart," he said without preamble, pulling up a complex diagram on his main screen. Southwest Digital University isn't just a fake website thrown together in someone's basement. This is sophisticated infrastructure designed to pass federal verification requirements. The screen showed a web of interconnected systems, professional-looking websites, fabricated accreditation documents, fake faculty profiles with stolen academic credentials. Everything designed to fool both students and federal loan processors. "Look at this," David continued, clicking through pages that looked identical to legitimate university websites I'd visited during my own college search. Professional web design, SSL certificates, even fake student reviews and alumni testimonials. She hired actual web developers, graphic designers, content writers. This represents months of planning and significant upfront investment. I stared at the fake faculty page, recognizing the stock photos Brittany had used. But where did she get the money to build all this? Detective Torres leaned forward. That's where it gets interesting. The initial funding came from smaller-scale identity theft, credit card fraud, fake personal loans, tax refund fraud. She's been building toward the student loan scheme for over a year. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been celebrating family dinners and sharing my academic struggles with Brittany, she'd been laying the groundwork to exploit my trust and steal my identity. Every conversation about my financial stress, every detail I'd shared about the complexity of student aid applications, it had all been research. "How many victims are we talking about now?" I asked. David pulled up a spreadsheet that made my stomach clench. Confirmed victims across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, 63 individuals. Total fraudulent loans, $2.3 million. But here's what's really troubling: the targeting algorithm. He showed me data analysis that revealed Brittany's systematic approach to finding victims: single mothers enrolled in community college programs, military veterans using GI benefits, first-generation college students from low-income families, immigrants seeking career advancement through online education. She specifically targeted people who would be less likely to immediately recognize discrepancies, people who were juggling multiple responsibilities, working full-time while studying, or unfamiliar with higher education systems. I thought about my own experience, how overwhelmed I'd felt navigating financial aid applications, how grateful I'd been for Brittany's help organizing my paperwork. She'd exploited that vulnerability across dozens of families. "There's something else," David said, pulling up email records. "Your cousin wasn't working alone. There's a network of at least 3 other people involved in recruitment and processing. They've been running similar operations in Colorado and Nevada." The scope of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just my cousin making a bad decision. This was organized crime targeting vulnerable communities across multiple states. What happens to all these families? The people who thought they were getting real degrees?
Detective Torres's expression grew grim. That's the worst part. Many of them had been attending classes for months, submitting assignments to fake professors, believing they're making progress toward legitimate degrees. Some have already quit their jobs or turned down other opportunities because they thought they were close to graduating. I felt sick thinking about the ripple effects, families restructuring their lives around educational goals that were completely fabricated, dreams being systematically destroyed by someone I'd trusted with my own hopes and struggles. The community center conference room felt too small for the weight of the stories being shared. Detective Torres had arranged for several victims to meet together, believing that understanding the broader impact would help everyone prepare for the legal proceedings ahead. I arrived early, nervous about facing people who'd been hurt by my cousin's actions. Would they blame me for not recognizing the signs earlier? Would they see me as complicit because of our family relationship? Jessica Hoffman was the first to arrive. At 34, she carried herself with the exhausted determination I recognized from other single mothers I'd met at the community center where I worked. Her handshake was firm, but her eyes held a wariness that spoke to months of betrayal and confusion. "I saw your name on the victim list," she said as we settled into plastic chairs. "You're the cousin Detective Torres mentioned?" I nodded, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "I'm so sorry. If I'd realized what she was doing earlier—" "Stop." Jessica's voice was gentle but firm. "You didn't know. I've been going over every interaction I had with your cousin, and she was convincing, professionally convincing." As other victims arrived, Maria Santos, a veteran pursuing a degree in business administration, Robert Chen, an immigrant working toward a teaching credential, and Lisa Williams, a grandmother trying to finish the college degree she'd started 40 years earlier, the conference room filled with a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and shared determination. Detective Torres facilitated the discussion, helping each person share their experience with Southwest Digital University. The stories were heartbreakingly similar: professional outreach, personalized attention to their specific career goals, payment plans that seemed manageable, and coursework that felt legitimate enough to maintain the illusion for months. "I was 3 months away from graduating," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'd already given notice at my job because the nursing program required full-time clinical rotations. I have 2 kids and no income now because I believed I was becoming a registered nurse." Robert's story was equally devastating. "I submitted my resignation from the factory job I'd held for 15 years. The teaching credential program promised placement assistance, and I thought I'd finally be able to support my family doing work that mattered." As I listened to each story, the full scope of Brittany's cruelty became clear. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen futures, derailed career plans, and exploited the dreams of people who had the least margin for error. But something else emerged from that conference room meeting: collective strength. Jessica, despite her own financial devastation, offered to help Maria find emergency assistance programs. Robert shared job leads with others who'd quit their positions. Lisa, the grandmother, brought homemade cookies and insisted on getting everyone's contact information because we're going to get through this together. "We can't let her get away with this," Jessica said as the meeting wound down. "Not just for us, but for everyone else she might target." I found myself nodding along with the group's determination to see the prosecution through, no matter how difficult the process became. These weren't just fellow victims, they were allies in ensuring Brittany faced consequences for her systematic exploitation of vulnerable communities. As we exchanged contact information and promised to support each other through the legal proceedings, I realized that my family's betrayal had led me to find a different kind of family, one built on shared purpose and mutual protection, rather than blind loyalty. The call came on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing case files for my internship. Aunt Linda's voice was strained, barely holding back tears. "Olivia, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight, please?" I found her sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by open laptops, bank statements, and legal documents. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, gray roots showing through her auburn hair, and her hands shook as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "I've been going through Brittany's computers," she said without preamble. "Everything I found makes it worse." She showed me spreadsheets tracking victim information, templates for fake transcripts, and email chains coordinating with accomplices in other states. The level of organization was chilling. Brittany had approached fraud with the same methodical precision other people brought to legitimate businesses. "She's been living a completely different life than what she showed the family," Linda continued. "Expensive clothes, lease payments on a luxury car, rent on a downtown apartment I didn't even know about, all funded by stolen money." I studied my aunt's face, seeing the same exhaustion and betrayal I'd been carrying for weeks. "What are you going to do?" "That's what I need to talk to you about." Linda's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Your father called today. He wants the whole family to meet this weekend to discuss damage control. He's talking about hiring a criminal defense attorney for Brittany and trying to negotiate some kind of plea deal that keeps her out of prison." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Linda, she's stolen over $2 million from 63 families. She's destroyed people's lives, their career dreams, their financial futures. She can't just negotiate her way out of consequences. I know. Tears started flowing down Linda's cheeks. But she's my daughter, Olivia. I keep thinking about her as a little girl, how excited she got about school projects, how she always wanted to help everyone with their homework. How did that little girl become someone who could do this? I reached across the table and took her hand. The little girl you remember isn't gone, but the adult she became made choices that hurt a lot of people. Protecting her from consequences now doesn't help her or prevent future victims. Linda pulled her hand away and walked to the window, staring out at her modest backyard. Your father thinks I'm betraying the family by not supporting Brittany unconditionally. He says blood loyalty should come before everything else. What do you think? She turned back to me, and I saw a strength I'd never noticed before. I think loyalty that enables someone to keep hurting people isn't really loyalty at all. It's cowardice disguised as family values. The weekend family meeting was as brutal as I'd expected. Dad's living room, usually the site of celebrations and holiday gatherings, felt like a battlefield. Rosa sat quietly in the corner, her discomfort obvious. Brittany arrived with a criminal defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman who immediately began discussing plea negotiations and damage mitigation. The federal prosecutors are interested in cooperation, the attorney explained. If Brittany provides information about her accomplices and helps recover stolen funds, they might consider reduced charges. Dad leaned forward eagerly. How reduced? Could she avoid prison time? Unlikely, given the scope of the fraud, but we might be looking at 2 years instead of 10. I watched Brittany during this discussion, searching for any sign of genuine remorse or understanding of the harm she'd caused. Instead, I saw calculation. She was trying to figure out how to minimize her own consequences while showing no concern for her victims. What about restitution? I asked. How much money can actually be recovered for the families she's stolen from? The attorney's expression grew uncomfortable. Most of the funds have been spent. Victims might recover 10 to 15 cents on the dollar if they're lucky. That's not acceptable, I said, my voice rising. These families restructured their entire lives around educational goals that were completely fabricated. They deserve full restitution. Dad's face reddened. Olivia, you need to think about family here. Brittany made mistakes, but destroying her life won't help anyone. Brittany destroyed her own life by choosing to steal from vulnerable families, and she's continuing to destroy other lives every day the scheme operates. The room erupted into arguments, Dad insisting that family loyalty required protecting Brittany regardless of her crimes, Rosa trying to mediate in rapid Spanish, the attorney attempting to refocus on legal strategy. But it was Linda's voice that cut through the chaos. Enough, she said quietly, but with such authority that everyone stopped talking. I've made my decision. I'm going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. If that means testifying against my own daughter, then that's what I'll do. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad stared at his sister-in-law in shock. Brittany's face crumpled. The attorney started talking about family member testimony and its impact on defense strategy. Linda, Dad said finally, you can't seriously be choosing strangers over your own daughter. I'm choosing justice over enabling, and I'm choosing to prevent future victims over protecting someone who's shown no genuine remorse for the harm she's caused. As the meeting disintegrated into hurt feelings and accusations, I realized the family I'd grown up with was fracturing permanently. But from the ruins of those broken relationships, something new was emerging. A commitment to justice that transcended blood ties, and an understanding that real love sometimes requires holding people accountable for their actions.
Walking out of my father's house that evening, I knew that Sunday dinners would never be the same. But I also knew that 63 families would finally have advocates fighting for their rights, and that Brittany's scheme would face the full weight of federal prosecution. The call from Detective Torres came at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting me awake from restless sleep. Olivia, we're executing the raids today. I wanted to give you advance notice before you see it on the news. I sat up in bed, my heart immediately racing. Today, all of them? Coordinated raids across Phoenix, Tucson, and Las Cruces. We have enough evidence to shut down the entire operation and arrest the primary conspirators. Your testimony and the evidence you provided were crucial to getting the warrants. After hanging up, I couldn't go back to sleep. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat by my kitchen window, watching the Phoenix sunrise paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across the city, federal agents were preparing to dismantle my cousin's criminal enterprise. Detective Torres had asked if I wanted to observe the main raid, and despite my conflicting feelings about Brittany, I'd said yes. I needed to see the scope of what she'd built with stolen money and broken dreams. The Southwest Digital University campus turned out to be a nondescript office building in a business park near Sky Harbor Airport. From the outside, it looked like any other corporate facility. Beige stucco walls, tinted windows, a small sign that could have belonged to an accounting firm or insurance company.
I sat in Detective Torres's unmarked car across the parking lot, watching a dozen federal agents and FBI windbreakers surround the building. The coordinated precision was almost choreographed, teams entering through multiple entrances while others secured the perimeter. "Building's clear," came the voice through Torres's radio. "Subjects in custody." We waited 20 minutes before Torres got clearance to enter. Walking through the front doors felt surreal. The lobby looked exactly like a legitimate university admissions office, complete with comfortable seating, informational brochures, and framed photos of smiling students receiving diplomas. But the back offices revealed the true nature of the operation. Room after room of computer workstations where employees had been processing fraudulent loan applications, creating fake transcripts, and maintaining the elaborate fiction of Southwest Digital University's academic programs. "Look at this," David Mitchell called from a server room lined with humming equipment. "They've got backup systems for everything. Student records, financial databases, even archived email communications with victims. This is a multi-million-dollar infrastructure." In what appeared to be Brittany's personal office, agents were photographing evidence that made my stomach turn. Spreadsheets tracking victim profiles, including detailed notes about their vulnerabilities and likelihood to report suspicious activity. Marketing materials specifically designed to target single mothers and first-generation college students. Financial projections showing expected loan disbursements over the next 2 years. She was planning to expand. Detective Torres showed me a business plan that outlined similar operations in California and Florida. Your decision to come forward probably prevented hundreds of additional victims. The most disturbing discovery was in a conference room that had been set up like a legitimate classroom, complete with whiteboards and video recording equipment. Brittany and her accomplices had been filming fake lectures and online courses, creating content that looked professional enough to maintain the illusion for students who were supposedly earning degrees. "The production values are actually impressive," one of the agents noted grimly. "They hired real actors to portray professors, used professional video equipment, even created elaborate course syllabi. Students were receiving assignments, submitting work, getting feedback on projects. The psychological manipulation is sophisticated." I thought about Maria Santos, the veteran who'd quit her job because she believed she was 3 months away from graduating with a nursing degree. She'd been submitting assignments to fake professors, studying curriculum that meant nothing, building her life around a future that had never existed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is all your fault. I hope you're happy now." It had to be from someone in Brittany's family or network, probably sent during the chaos of the arrests. "We found the financial records," David called out from another room. Bank accounts in multiple states, shell companies, investment accounts. The total amount stolen is actually higher than we estimated, closer to $3 million. $3 million stolen from families who could least afford it. $3 million that should have funded real education, real career advancement, real hope for economic mobility. As we toured the facility, I tried to reconcile this criminal enterprise with the cousin I'd grown up loving. The Brittany who had helped me with homework, who'd celebrated my academic achievements, who had seemed genuinely proud of my success. Had that person ever really existed? Or had I been seeing only what she wanted me to see? "Transport is ready for the suspects," came another radio call. Through the office windows, I watched as Brittany and 3 accomplices were led to federal vehicles in handcuffs. Even from a distance, I could see her scanning the parking lot, probably looking for family members or supporters. When her eyes found Detective Torres's car, I instinctively ducked down, not ready for that confrontation. "She's going to federal holding," Torres explained as we watched the convoy disappear. "Arraignment is scheduled for Thursday. The evidence we've gathered today should be more than sufficient for federal prosecutors to move forward with charges." The raid had uncovered more than just evidence of fraud. It had revealed the calculated cruelty of targeting vulnerable populations, the systematic exploitation of educational dreams, and the sophisticated infrastructure built to maximize harm while minimizing detection. Walking out of that office building, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and grief. Justice was moving forward, but the cost had been enormous, not just for the victims, but for my family, my sense of trust, and my understanding of how people I loved could become people I no longer recognized. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse wearing my best professional outfit, preparing to testify against my cousin in front of a jury of 12 strangers. The courtroom felt impossibly formal after months of informal meetings with investigators and prosecutors. Dark wood paneling, an American flag behind the judge's bench, and the weight of federal authority pressing down on everyone present. The prosecution had spent weeks preparing me for this moment. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez had walked me through every aspect of my testimony, helping me understand how my personal story fit into the broader case against Brittany and her co-conspirators. "Remember," Rodriguez had told me during our final preparation session, "you're not just testifying about what happened to you. You're representing all the victims who trusted the defendant with their educational dreams and financial futures."
Brittany sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the sophisticated criminal the evidence had revealed. She'd lost weight during the months in federal custody, and her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked like resignation mixed with defiance. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom fell silent except for the court reporters typing and the subtle hum of the ventilation system. Rodriguez began with basic questions about my relationship with Brittany, our family connections, and the trust that had developed between us over years of shared holidays and celebrations. I explained how she'd helped me organize my financial documents, how grateful I'd been for her interest in my education, how completely I'd trusted her with my personal information. "Ms. Parker, when did you first discover that your student loan information had been used fraudulently?" I recounted that October morning when I'd found the unauthorized loans, the shock of seeing Southwest Digital University on my federal aid statement, the growing realization that someone I trusted had betrayed me in the most calculated way possible. "And what was the defendant's response when you confronted her about this fraud?" "Initially, she denied any involvement. Then she claimed she was trying to help me by getting additional funding for my education. Finally, she admitted to using my information, but said she planned to make the university legitimate." The prosecution led me through the evidence I'd gathered, the digital footprints that had connected the fraud directly to Brittany, and the devastating impact on other victims. I testified about meeting Jessica Hoffman, Maria Santos, and the other families whose lives had been derailed by my cousin's criminal enterprise. "Ms. Parker, how many total victims did investigators ultimately identify?" 87 confirmed victims across 5 states,
total fraudulent loans exceeding $3.2 million. The defense attorney's cross-examination was more challenging. She focused on my family relationship with Brittany, suggesting that my testimony might be influenced by personal feelings of betrayal rather than objective facts. Ms. Parker, isn't it true that you felt overshadowed by your cousin's charisma and social success within your family? No, that's not accurate. Wasn't there family tension about your academic achievements making other family members feel inadequate? I took a breath, remembering Rodriguez's coaching about staying calm and factual. Brittany always seemed proud of my academic success. She frequently told family members how impressed she was with my academic success. But that could have been a facade, couldn't it? Hiding resentment or jealousy? I can only testify about what I observed and experienced. The evidence of fraud speaks for itself regardless of anyone's motivations. The most difficult moment came when the defense attorney asked about my decision to cooperate with federal investigators, despite family pressure to handle the matter privately. Ms. Parker, multiple family members asked you to resolve this situation without involving law enforcement, didn't they? Yes. And you chose to ignore their wishes and pursue criminal charges against your own cousin. I looked directly at the jury, thinking about Maria Santos sitting in the gallery, about Jessica Hoffman, who'd driven from Tucson to attend the trial, about dozens of other families whose futures had been stolen. I chose to prevent additional victims and to seek justice for the families who'd already been harmed. My cousin's actions affected 87 families across 5 states. This wasn't a private family matter, it was systematic fraud targeting vulnerable communities. During redirect examination, Rodriguez gave me the opportunity to explain my decision more fully. Ms. Parker, why did you ultimately decide to cooperate with federal investigators? Because I realized that staying silent would make me complicit in ongoing harm to innocent families. The evidence showed that my cousin was actively recruiting new victims, stealing from single mothers trying to improve their lives, veterans using educational benefits they'd earned through military service, immigrants pursuing the American dream through education. I couldn't live with myself knowing I could have prevented that suffering and chose not to. After stepping down from the witness stand, I sat in the gallery watching other victims testify. Jessica spoke powerfully about quitting her job to focus on what she believed was legitimate nursing school coursework. Maria's testimony about her children asking when mommy would be a nurse brought several jurors to tears. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. Financial experts traced money flows through multiple bank accounts. Computer forensics specialists demonstrated the sophisticated technology used to create fake accreditation documents. FBI agents testified about the coordinated nature of the criminal enterprise and its expansion plans. Brittany's defense relied primarily on portraying her as someone who'd gotten in over her head, claiming she had originally intended to create a legitimate university, but had made increasingly desperate decisions when faced with financial pressure. Her attorney argued for reduced charges based on cooperation with authorities and claimed remorse. But the evidence was too extensive, the harm too calculated, and the victims too numerous for that narrative to be convincing. After 3 days of deliberations, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering.
As the verdicts were read, I watched Brittany's face for any sign of genuine remorse or acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused. Instead, I saw the same calculation I'd observed during family meetings. She was already planning her appeal, already strategizing her next move. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon, I felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost had been enormous for everyone involved. The legal proceedings had provided validation and accountability, but they couldn't restore the time, money, and trust that had been stolen from so many families. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold February morning, 4 months after the guilty verdicts. Judge Patricia Hernandez had a reputation for fairness, but also for taking white-collar crime seriously, especially when it targeted vulnerable populations. Brittany stood before the bench wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her.
The months in federal custody had aged her visibly. Gray streaks in her hair, deeper lines around her eyes, a defeated posture that contrasted sharply with the confident woman who'd manipulated our family and dozens of victims. The prosecution presented their sentencing recommendation first, detailing the scope of the fraud and its impact on victims. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rodriguez read victim impact statements from families across 5 states, including a letter from Maria Santos, describing how she'd lost her job, her savings, and her faith in the educational system. Your Honor, Rodriguez concluded, this was not a crime of passion or desperation. This was calculated, systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations over an extended period. The defendant showed no genuine remorse during the investigation or trial and continued attempting to manipulate family members even after her arrest. The defense attorney asked for leniency, citing Brittany's lack of prior criminal history and claiming she'd been influenced by more sophisticated criminals in the broader fraud network. She presented character letters from high school teachers and distant relatives who remembered Brittany as helpful and ambitious. But it was the victim impact statements that carried the most weight in the courtroom. Jessica Hoffman spoke directly to Brittany, her voice steady but filled with controlled anger. You didn't just steal money from me. You stole 2 years of my life, my children's stability, and my faith in people who claim to want to help. I'm a single mother who worked double shifts to save money for nursing school, and you turned that sacrifice into funding for your criminal lifestyle. Robert Chen, the immigrant worker who'd quit his factory job believing he was earning a teaching credential, spoke about the broader impact on his community. You targeted people like me because you thought we wouldn't fight back, that we wouldn't understand the system well enough to recognize fraud. You were wrong. We may be vulnerable, but we're not powerless. When Judge Hernandez asked if Brittany wanted to make a statement before sentencing, she stood slowly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize to my family and to the people who were hurt by my actions. I never intended for things to go as far as they did. I thought I could make everything work out, that I could create something legitimate and beneficial. Even in her apology, Brittany couldn't fully acknowledge the calculated nature of her crimes or take complete responsibility for the systematic harm she had caused. Judge Hernandez's response was measured but firm. Ms. Wells, the evidence presented in this case demonstrates a level of sophistication and premeditation that contradicts your claims of good intentions. You created an elaborate criminal enterprise specifically designed to exploit vulnerable populations over an extended period. You showed no genuine remorse even when confronted with evidence of the harm you were causing. The sentence was 63 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and full restitution to victims, though everyone understood that most of the stolen money could never be recovered. As Brittany was led away in shackles, I felt an unexpected wave of grief, not for the criminal who had been sentenced, but for the cousin I'd thought I knew, for the family relationships that had been permanently damaged, for the innocence I'd lost about people's capacity for calculated cruelty. The months following sentencing were complicated. Dad eventually stopped blaming me for Brittany's imprisonment, but our relationship remained strained. Sunday dinners resumed, but they felt different. Smaller, more cautious, marked by conversations that carefully avoided mentioning the absent family member. Aunt Linda surprised everyone by becoming one of the strongest advocates for the victims' rights organization that Jessica and I started. I failed my daughter by not seeing what she was becoming, Linda told me one afternoon while we worked on victim support materials. But I won't fail the family she hurt by staying silent now. The restitution process moved slowly through federal bureaucracy. Most victims recovered only a small percentage of their losses, but the psychological impact of seeing their attacker held accountable seemed to matter more than the financial recovery. Dr. Mills helped me process the complex emotions surrounding the case, the family fractures, and my emerging role as an advocate for fraud victims. You transformed personal betrayal into community protection, she observed during one of our regular meetings. That's not easy, but it's how individual courage becomes systemic change. Professor Rachel Stevens, who'd lost her teaching position when the fake university collapsed, found new employment with a legitimate online education provider. She began working with our victim support organization to develop educational materials about recognizing and avoiding degree mill scams. The most meaningful moment in the healing process came 8 months after sentencing, when Maria Santos completed her nursing degree through a legitimate program. The graduation ceremony was small and simple, but seeing her walk across that stage in her cap and gown felt like a victory not just for Maria, but for everyone who'd refused to let Brittany's crimes destroy their educational dreams. Standing in that graduation audience, surrounded by Jessica, Linda, Dr. Mills, and other allies who'd fought for justice, I realized that while Brittany's betrayal had shattered my understanding of family loyalty, it had also led me to discover a different kind of family. One built on shared values, mutual protection, and the determination to turn personal pain into community healing. The legal consequences were clear and final, but the real work of healing and prevention was just beginning. 1 year after Brittany's sentencing, I stood at a podium in the Phoenix Convention Center, looking out at an audience of federal investigators, university administrators, and victim advocates who had gathered for the National Conference on Educational Fraud Prevention. My hands were steady as I adjusted the microphone, a far cry from the trembling graduate student who had discovered those first fraudulent loans what felt like a lifetime ago. "My name is Olivia Parker," I began, "and 2 years ago, I thought educational fraud was something that happened to other people." The audience was quiet, attentive. In the front row, I spotted Detective Torres, who'd become not just an ally, but a friend. Dr. Mills sat near the back, beaming with the pride of a mentor watching her students succeed. Most importantly, Jessica Hoffman was in the third row, wearing her nursing scrubs because she'd driven straight from her shift at Phoenix Children's Hospital to attend my presentation. I told the story I'd become comfortable sharing: the discovery of fraudulent loans, the family confrontation, the difficult decision to cooperate with federal investigators. But I also shared what I'd learned about the systematic nature of educational fraud and its devastating impact on vulnerable communities. Southwest Digital University wasn't just a fake school. It was a sophisticated operation that specifically targeted single mothers, military veterans, first-generation college students, and immigrant families. The perpetrators understood that these populations were less likely to immediately recognize fraud and more likely to trust educational opportunities that seemed accessible and supportive. The nonprofit organization Jessica and I had founded, Educational Justice Phoenix, had helped over 200 fraud victims navigate the complex process of loan forgiveness, credit repair, and finding legitimate educational opportunities. We'd partnered with community colleges and legitimate online universities to create pathways for victims to continue their education without starting completely over. One of our greatest success stories is Maria Santos, I continued, gesturing toward the audience where Maria sat wearing her nursing uniform. Maria was 3 months away from what she believed would be graduation from a nursing program when she discovered she had been attending a fake university. Today, she's a registered nurse at Banner University Medical Center, and she volunteers with our organization to help other victims rebuild their educational dreams. The presentation covered the warning signs of diploma mills, the importance of verifying accreditation, and the federal resources available to fraud victims. But more importantly, it addressed the psychological impact of educational fraud, the shame, the loss of trust, the feeling that pursuing education was somehow dangerous. Victims often blame themselves, I explained. They feel foolish for falling for sophisticated scams designed by criminals who understand exactly how to exploit hope and ambition. Our role as advocates is to redirect that shame toward the perpetrators, while helping victims reclaim their agency and their dreams. During the question and answer session, a university administrator from Colorado asked about family dynamics in fraud cases. How do you handle situations where family members are involved in the fraud? What advice do you give to victims who are struggling with divided loyalties? I paused, thinking about my own journey from family loyalty to community protection. Family relationships are complicated, and there's no single right answer, but I've learned that protecting someone from the consequences of harmful actions isn't really love, it's enabling. True loyalty sometimes means holding people accountable, even when it's painful.
The audience responded with sustained applause. But I knew the real measure of success wasn't in conference presentations. It was in the individual stories of recovery and resilience that filled our case files. After the conference, Jessica, Maria, and I drove to a small restaurant in Central Phoenix where we'd started meeting monthly to plan our organization's work. The conversation flowed easily between strategy discussions and personal updates. Jessica's children were thriving, Maria had been promoted to charge nurse, and I was starting my doctoral program in social work with a focus on financial crimes against vulnerable populations. I got a letter from Brittany last week, I mentioned as we shared dessert. It was the first communication I'd received from my cousin since her sentencing. "What did she say?" Jessica asked.
She's participating in a prisoner education program. She said she's been reading about the families affected by her actions and that she finally understands the real impact of what she did. I stirred my coffee, still processing my complicated feelings about the letter. She asked if there was any way she could contribute to victim advocacy work from prison. Maria leaned forward. "What did you tell her?" "I haven't responded yet. Part of me wants to believe she's genuinely changed, but I also know that Brittany is skilled at saying what people want to hear. Any contribution she makes needs to be about helping victims, not about rehabilitating her image." We decided that if Brittany was serious about making amends, she could write educational materials for other prisoners about recognizing and avoiding financial fraud. Her insider knowledge of how these schemes operate could be valuable for prevention efforts, but only if her motivations were genuinely about harm reduction rather than self-interest. The evening ended with us reviewing applications for our newest program, scholarships for fraud victims pursuing legitimate education. The funding came from recovered assets, small donations, and grants from foundations that supported educational justice initiatives. "Look at this application," Jessica said, sliding a folder across the table. "Single mother in Tucson, victim of a fake medical assistant program. She wants to become a real medical assistant through Pima Community College." Reading the application, I saw echoes of all our stories: the hope, the betrayal, the determination to rebuild. The applicant had written about feeling embarrassed and defeated after discovering she'd been defrauded, but also about her commitment to preventing other families from experiencing the same exploitation. "Approved," I said without hesitation, "and let's see if she'd be interested in joining our speakers bureau once she graduates." Driving home that night, I passed the exit for my father's neighborhood. Our relationship had slowly healed over the months, built on careful conversations and shared acknowledgement that family loyalty and justice didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Dad had even attended one of our fundraising events, quietly proud of the organization I'd built from the ashes of family betrayal. Aunt Linda had become one of our most dedicated volunteers, channeling her grief about Brittany into fierce advocacy for fraud victims. "I couldn't save my daughter from her own choices," she'd told me, "but I can help save other families from becoming her victims." My small apartment was filled with thank you letters from families we'd helped, certificates from law enforcement agencies recognizing our work, and photos from graduations and job placements. But the most meaningful item was a simple framed quote from Dr. Mills. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear to protect others." As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that October morning when I discovered fraudulent loans in my name. The naive graduate student who trusted family above all else had evolved into someone who understood that real protection sometimes required difficult choices, and that healing often emerged from the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new victims needing support, new opportunities to turn individual pain into collective strength. The work was challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also deeply meaningful. Every family we helped rebuild their educational dreams felt like a victory not just for them, but for everyone who refused to let criminals exploit hope and ambition. Educational fraud continued to evolve, with new schemes targeting new vulnerabilities, but our community of survivors had evolved too. We'd learned that individual courage could trigger systemic change, that justice was possible even when it came at great personal cost, and that the strongest families were built not on blind loyalty, but on shared commitment to protecting the vulnerable. The girl who'd once organized her financial documents at a kitchen table had become a woman who organized communities around justice. It wasn't the future I'd planned, but it was the future that mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.